Good morning. How are you today? Well, it feels warmer, still in the 20s, but I guess it's the wind. Sun is out, and that's always nice. Uh, I've been batting around what I'm going to talk about in my podcast. So I'm not going to actually talk about what's, I'm going to talk about my podcast, but I have a couple of ideas that I'm playing around with. Uh, some people have written me and said they hope I'm not too optimistic in my belief system about how Biden is doing. And I don't think I am. But the mention of one thing is not the exclusion of the other, meaning that because things go well, it doesn't mean that there aren't bad things going on. And I think I did point out yesterday how the Republicans are in a no man, no woman's land, if you will, in which they do two things that are antagonistic to democratic and liberal thinking. One is that they lie and they use sophist tricks to not inform, but to coerce and victimize people who, for whatever reason, can't think better. And the second thing, ironically, while they're engaged in this S&M relationship with their followers, is that they have no compassion or concern, though they quote the Bible, presumably including Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount, but they show none of that charity toward others. They're warlike and hateful and discriminate against so many, and basically it's a white supremacist movement. So how do we combat this? And there are parallels in history. The one that I think of most, at least in American terms, is what happened with McCarthyism in the 50s. And there were a number of writings at the time. Arthur Schlesinger, who was a hero of mine, and I got to work with him on the Kennedy campaigns. And he was brilliant and accessible in a way that a man of his intellectual gifts you might not think was so accessible. And after his writing, Hofstadter wrote a book which has become the book on anti-intellectualism. And it examines how and why some people resist, if you will, intelligence, learning, education, and so forth. He particularly was interested in the opposition to Stevenson, who ran against Eisenhower. And Stevenson was a brilliant man, but they referred to him as eggheads. It was a way of discriminating against thought and science and logic, appealing to emotion. And people may not think of Eisenhower in that way, but whatever he was before he became a candidate, that's what he was as the candidate, and for a long time as the president. So we're revisiting that in America. Instead of eggheads, we have snowflakes, and we question science and logic and anybody who would support those things. And so we have the sophistry of that movement, if you will. And it's really divided into two parts. It's divided into their distortions of logic and their rhetorical tricks, which are to coerce a certain following, as opposed to informing or persuading a following. And the second part is that they have this harsh, anti-human, amoral view toward their subjects, their followers, their ditto heads, which is my expression in response to their claim of snowflakes. We have to be aware of the rhetorical tricks and deal with them. And I think that's what I'm going to talk about today a little bit, about how we have to use reason to counteract this approach increasingly by the Republican Party. And I don't think we can count on them backing off. I would like to, in my way, say that a lot of the fight is behind us. That is to say that Trump is reduced in stature and size and access to platforms and things like that. And that's going to be true to a large extent. But as a Kennedy file who thought so highly of JFK and despised so strongly Richard Nixon, who was Eisenhower's vice president from the start, you can't ignore the fact how Nixon came back, the new Nixon, at a time in 1968 when the country was torn apart, really. And Steve Bannon has said, as an object of their movement, it's not to get a majority, it's to get such a strong, cohesive minority as they can force the majority to deal with them. Well, you see, that doesn't work in an election, obviously, and that's why you have to steal it. But that's the playbook for their side. And we have to be vigilant in terms of logic and the truth and countering these efforts to torture Americans some sort of autocracy instead of the democracy we have. And the midterms are coming, and they don't seem like they're around the corner, but they really are. And that's where we're going to have to make a difference. So for those of you out there who thought I was too optimistic yesterday, I hope you don't think these tools, which I'm talking about, is how we argue, how we rebut falsity, how we isolate those who would destroy America, who still exist and will not go away. I hope you don't think that these are too pessimistic. I gave a lecture once in opposition to a judge I had great affection for. And because of his position, he was fairly moderate in his views. And the subject was the Patriot Act. And I was very strongly against it as depriving us of individual rights and freedoms. And I had a position on the Hill at the time it was passed after 9/11, so I felt pretty strongly about it. And a fellow that I liked a great deal got up afterwards and he asked me a question, and then he criticized me by saying, "John, you live too much in your mind." And I gave a polite response, but what I wanted to say is, what is not in your mind? Feelings, thoughts, logic, how you feel pain. How do you limit that and exclude it? And I think what he was really saying to me was I was using logic and plain thinking and asking the question, had we gone too far with the Patriot Act for purposes other than dealing with whatever necessary incidents arose as a result of 9/11? And I see that again here, except in a passive way. Are we going to do too little to preserve our gains? And that's why I was encouraged by Biden saying to the nations that we have to be concerned about autocrats versus Democrats. So that's my thinking now, and I may elaborate upon this when I do my podcast later today. But get out. It's wonderful in my cathedral of trees, and it feels warm, which is amazing. Talk to you. Bye-bye.